Hi, it's Tash. Welcome to Tash's Library. Today's video is going to be looking at how I have done in the R Fantasy Bingo for 2024, which will be finished at the end of this month because it goes from April to the end of March each year. So I thought I'd go through all the prompts and see if I have indeed fulfilled them. So starting on the first row at the top, first in the series is read the first book in the series. Hard mode, though, is the series is more than 3 books long. So I have read The Way of Kings for this one by Brandon Sanderson, and that fulfills hard mode because it is a 5-book series. At least that first arc is, and it's probably going to be more eventually. So Stormlight Archive, done. I really liked this book, and indeed I went on to read Words of Radiance and plan to continue the series. They're just quite chunky and I haven't got to them yet. Alliterative title is read a book where multiple words in the title begin with the same letter. Hard mode is the title has 3 words or more that start with the same letter. For this one I read To Sleep in a Sea of Stars by Christopher Paolini. This one was average for me. I enjoyed components of it, enjoyed other components way less, and I will be reviewing this in my February wrap-up. Under the Surface, read a book when important setting is either underground or underwater. Hard mode is at least half the book takes place underground or underwater. For this one, I read A Letter to the Luminous Deep by Sylvie Catherall, and this one is pretty much, at least half of it is underwater because it takes place in a house under the sea. It was quite a fun read, and I do plan to read the sequel. Criminals. Read a book in which the main character is a criminal, and for hard mode, it needs to feature a heist. Now, this one I struggled with because I initially started really reading The Palace Job, which I didn't like very much. I actually DNF'd it about 20% in, which means I can't count it. So unfortunately for this one, I'm not going to hit hard mode. I'm only going to include The Dead Cattail Assassins by P. Djeli Clark, which I've recently read. And this one obviously involves a criminal and assassin, but there's no heist. So it's not hard mode, but it does indeed fulfill the prompt to some extent. Dreams, another prompt that I did not fulfill in hard mode. And this is read a book where characters experience dreams, magical or otherwise. Hard mode, however, is the dream is not mystical or unusual, just a normal dream or nightmare. And this was incredibly difficult to find. I may have read a book that had a normal dream, but I didn't notice, I didn't remember it if I did, and it would have been a minor component of the book. And therefore I have included The Life of Heaven by Ursula K. Le Guin here, because it indeed does have a very, very mystical and powerful dreams in it. But no, alas, no hard mode. All right, second row begins with entitled animals. Read a book that has an animal in the title. The animal in the title does not have to appear in the story. Hard mode is the animal is a fantasy or science fiction creature. I read a few of these, so I easily hit hard mode, but for the square, I'm going to throw in Leviathan Falls by James S.A. Corey, because Leviathans were included as a possible creature we could use. I really enjoyed this. It sort of brought the series home. It was fun. Bards. Read a book in which the primary protagonist is a bard, musician, poet, or storyteller. Hard mode is the character is explicitly called a bard. For this one, I read A River Enchanted by Rebecca Ross because the main character, Jack, is explicitly called a bard, so it hits hard mode. I semi-enjoyed this one. It's an average one, and I will be reviewing it in a bit more detail in my January wrap-up. Prologues and epilogues. Read a book that has either a prologue or an epilogue. Hard mode must have both. For this one, I included The City of Stardust by Georgia Summers, which does indeed have both, so it hits hard mode. I, alas, did not enjoy this book very much, but I did finish it. Self-published or indie publisher. Read a book that was self-published or published for an independent publisher. Hard mode is it was self-published and has fewer than 100 ratings on Goodreads, or an indie publisher that has done an AMA with R Fantasy. For this one, I included The Elements of Time, The Winds of Change by Sam Paisley. At the time of reading this, it had 41 ratings. Now, this had an interesting premise, but once again, it wasn't a book I loved, and I will definitely not be continuing the series. Romantasy. I was worried about this one because I'm not a fan of romantasy, but it's read a book that features romance as a main plot. This must be speculative in nature, but does not have to be fantasy. Hard mode is the main character is LGBTQIA+. For this one, I read Small Miracles by Olivia Atwater, and indeed there is a female-female romance in this, so it does hit hard mode. This was a sweet read. I actually enjoyed it a lot more than I thought I would, because I'm not a fan of romance in my novels. And yes, I would recommend it for anyone who likes romance. It was fun. All right, the next row, it starts with Dark Academia. Read a book that fits the dark academia aesthetic. This includes school and university, secret societies, and dark secrets. Does not have to be fantasy, but must be speculative. Hard mode is the school itself is entirely mundane. For this one, I read Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo. It is set at Yale University, which is a mundane school, and does have secret societies and magic and all sorts of things. Definitely feels a dark academia aesthetic. I enjoyed components of this, but I will not be continuing the series. Multi-POV. Read a book with at least 3 point of view characters. Hard mode is at least 5 point of view characters. For this one, I read Sunbringer by Hannah Kaner, which is the sequel to Godkiller. I absolutely loved Godkiller. Sunbringer was also good, but nowhere near as good as the first book. However, it did have 5 POV characters, so it fulfills hard mode. And I will be continuing this series. Published in 2024. A book published for the first time in 2024. First translations into your language of choice are allowed. Hard mode, it's also the author's first published novel. For this, I read The Silver Blood Promise by James Logan, because it's his debut novel and it was published in 2024. I really enjoyed this and I plan to continue the series. Character with a disability. Read a book in which an important character has a physical or mental disability. Hard mode is a main character has a physical or mental disability. For this one, I'm going to include City of Blades by Robert Jackson Bennett. It is the sequel to City of Stairs. I absolutely adore this series. Absolutely adore it, and I have indeed finished the series at this stage. But the second book follows the main character who has a physical disability. Published in the 1990s. Read a book that was published in the 1990s. Hard mode, the author or one of the authors has also published something in the last 5 years. For this, I read Doomsday Book by Connie Willis, which was published in 1992. Connie Willis is still publishing, and her most recent book was The Road to Roswell, which was published in 2023. I adored Doomsday Book. In fact, I have adored all the books I've read by Connie Willis at this stage and plan to read more. Next row starts with Orcs, Trolls and Goblins. Read a book featuring orcs, trolls or goblins. Hard mode, as the main character. For this one, I read A Demon in the Desert by Ash Armstrong. This book has an orc main character. He's sort of a bounty hunter type character in a Wild West setting. I enjoyed the characters. I enjoyed the premise of this. Did not love the execution, but I'm open to continue the series. Space opera, my favorite. I love science fiction. Read a sci-fi book that features a large cast of characters and has a focus on social dynamics, which may be political or personal in nature. Hard Mode is it's written by an author of marginalized gender identity, e.g. women, trans people, or non-binary people. And for this one, I read A Memory Called Empire by Arkady Martine, who is indeed a woman. This is the first book in a duology, and I have subsequently completed this duology because it was just a masterpiece of political intrigue. Really fun read. Author of color. Read a book by an author of color. Hard Mode is it must be a debut novel published in the last 5 years. For this, I read Shigidi and the Brass Head of Ubalufon by Wally Talabi. This was published in 2023, so fits Hard Mode. I really enjoyed the African mythology in this one, and I enjoyed the overall plot. I just wasn't a massive fan of some of the pacing, but I'm very open to read another book by the author. Survival. Read a book in which the primary goal of the characters and story focuses on survival. Surviving an apocalypse, surviving a war, surviving high school, etc. Hard Mode is no superviruses or pandemics. For this, I read The Wolf in the Whale by Jordana Max Brodsky. This is set in the harsh landscape of the Arctic, where there is a constant survival for food and shelter, and the main character is also facing the potential threat of an invasion. This is all about survival. It definitely fits Hard Mode because it does not include superviruses. I love this book. It is very dark in places. It is quite a heavy read. It definitely has a lot of trigger warnings for those people who need to look at those. But gosh, it was a beautiful, beautiful book about surviving a harsh landscape. Judge a book by its cover. Choose a book because you like its cover. Hard Mode is based only on the cover, no reading the blurb. Now this one I kind of half did Hard Mode because I read The Book of Doors by Gareth Brown. Now I picked this book up in the store purely on the cover. However, I obviously read the blurb before I finally purchased it. But I planned to get it. The only reason I read the blurb is to make sure that it wasn't going to be a romance book, because I don't like romance in my books. But yes, absolutely gorgeous cover. It had books on it. I was sold, and I adored this book. This book was just next level brilliant. I really, really enjoyed it. And final row, set in a small town. The primary setting is a small town. Hard Mode, the small town can be real or fictional, but the broader setting must be our own world and not a secondary world. For this, I read Something Wicked This Way Comes by Ray Bradbury. It is set in a small town in America. This was very atmospheric, very cool, very interesting. I love Ray Bradbury's writing, and definitely a little bit scary in places. 5 short stories. Any 5 short stories or novelettes. Hard Mode is read an entire speculative anthology or collection. For this, I read Stories of Our Life and Others by Ted Chiang. This is a whole collection of short stories by Ted Chiang, which means it fulfilled Hard Mode. I really enjoyed this and plan to read more of his short stories. Eldritch creatures. Read a book featuring a being that is uncanny, unearthly, and weird. This can be a god or monster from another plane or realm and is usually beyond mortal understanding. Hard Mode, the book is not related to the Cthulhu mythos. For this, I read Annihilation by Jeff Vandermeer. There is definitely a lot of uncanny stuff going on in this book, and I really enjoyed it and definitely plan to continue the series. Reference materials. Read a book that features additional material such as a map, footnotes, glossary, translation guide, dramatis personae, etc. Hard Mode book contains at least 2 types of additional material. For this, I read The Priory of the Orange Tree by Samantha Shannon. This has 2 maps, a glossary, and a list of characters, so definitely fulfills Hard Mode. I really enjoyed this book, just super epic fantasy, and I do plan to read the prequel book. And finally, it's a book club or read along book. Now, this was the one square I replaced because you're allowed to replace it with a prompt from a previous year. The reason I did this is because I don't really participate in book clubs. And so I decided to replace it with a 2022 prompt, which was name in the title. And for this, I read The 7 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle by Stuart Turton. This was a kind of mind-bending sort of sci-fi mystery hybrid, and I really enjoyed it. So that is it. That is my bingo board. I definitely filled all 25 squares, which is absolutely awesome, but there's 2 squares where I didn't fulfill Hard Mode. I am very happy with that though, because I definitely read certain books that I probably would have put off for a bit longer. So I'm very glad I participated in this. And it was something I always had in mind when I was picking my to be read lists. I do plan to participate in 2025 and really look forward to seeing the prompts and making a video about what I plan to read. Now, of course, what I plan to read will probably not be what I read, but it's nice to have plans anyway. So that is it. Thank you so much for watching, and until I see you next time, take care.